Hello. Are you planning or budgeting for a new farm shed project? Maybe you're aware that there may be council permits involved and wondering how much more damage this will do to your back pocket. Firstly, let's make it clear that nearly all farm shed builds require council permits, and it does add to the cost. Now, we understand that sometimes permits can seem like an unnecessary expense, but remember, your new shed is a significant investment. In the big picture, the permit costs are just part of the overall total expense. So in today's video, we're going to shed some light on permit costs. My name is Lester, and a few other common questions we get about permits are, can I get an exemption for my shed? Or does it cost less to apply for permits myself? Or do private surveyors charge more than my local council? These are all great questions which we will answer, but let's start with the cost one first. So what do permits cost? Unfortunately, there's no one size fits all answer to this question. Due to the variations between council shires, the application processes and project types, it's very difficult to project a firm cost for your permit. However, given the number of permit applications we process on behalf of clients every day, which is lots, we can provide a fairly accurate range of permit costs for various shed types based on Action still managing the application process. So based on farm sheds built by Action in 2021, the average cost of permits for farm sheds was around $2,600. But to get some idea of approximate figures for a range of different types of sheds, check out the examples we've provided below this video. Now you might be wondering how a permit, essentially just a piece of paper, can be so expensive, and it's a good question. So we've put together 4 of the main factors that influence permit costs. Number 1, council versus private surveyors. Do private surveyors charge more than local shires to issue permits? In general, yes. And the reason for this is that with private surveyors, you're essentially paying extra for a convenient and timely permit process and to avoid any project hold-ups due to permit issues or red tape in the shires. Now, while you can certainly apply for permits via your local council, for projects with a tight deadline, this might not be your best option. At Action, we choose to use a private surveyor because most of our shed builds are time bound. So for example, a hay shed needs to be completed for hay season, or a shearing shed that needs to be ready for shearing, or even a ram sale shed that needs to be completed ready for the sale day. So number 2, shed location can affect cost. The actual shed location will influence what you end up spending on permits. This is primarily because the location of your site is often what determines whether or not you will require a planning permit as well as a building permit. So a planning permit, as known as a development approval in New South Wales and South Australia, is an approval issued by the local council to allow the development of a rural shed on your property. For further info on this, check out our other video on shed permits explained. As well as being additional cost, planning permits are most time-consuming permits and can often take months to be processed. So number 3, shed project value. Now, while there are government fees and council fees that will be the same for every shed regardless of the shed value, the pricing structure for some sections of the permit is based on a percentage of the total cost. And finally, number 4, the project complexity. Now, generally speaking, the more complex a shed project is, the more complex the permit requirements are. Obviously, that's not rocket science, but for example, a large farm machinery workshop will have significantly different permit requirements compared to, say, a 1,000 bale hay shed, and a shearing shed will be different again. These differences will largely be determined by the size of the shed, the intended use, and the classification of the shed. So to give you some examples, we're talking about things such as special design to meet fire safety requirements, a toilet installed in the vicinity, or provision for disabled access. All these factors add to it and will require extra resources in drawing and paperwork, which contributes to the cost. So that's the big four. But before we move on, there's a couple of other points to consider that can affect the cost of permits. The shire you're located in will influence the cost of your permit. Unfortunately, council permit costs are not standardised across councils, meaning that some councils will charge more for permits than other councils. There's nothing that can be done about that. But having said that, some councils do offer reduced rates for areas affected by natural disaster events such as bushfires, floods and drought. Now, if this is relevant to your area, it'd be worth checking with your local council or asking our building consultants to check for you to see if reduced permit charges are available for your shed. And another point is, will it cost less to apply for permits myself? Well, yes and no. While it may appear more cost effective to apply for shed permits yourself, there are a few things to keep in mind. Time is money, as you know, and applying for a permit is very time consuming if you haven't done it before, especially if you don't have easy access to required documents and permit lodgement sites, etc. And the council will still charge you for your permit, and it's questionable whether the savings will justify the headache. In addition to this, applying as an owner builder rather than using a registered builder such as Action Steel will mean that greater responsibility falls on you, the owner, if anything goes wrong. Now that obviously doesn't really make a difference to cost, but you can learn more about these obligations and responsibilities on the following sites: the Victorian Building Authority, New South Wales Fair Trading, or the Australian Owner Builders for SA. So applying for the permits yourself may only be beneficial if you're working to a strict budget or if your project completion is not time bound. So that pretty much sums up what influences the cost of permits when building a shed. But before you go, we mentioned exemptions earlier, so let's quickly cover that too. So can you get an exemption for your shed? Maybe. Some shires offer permit exemptions for certain size sheds. For example, the following shires offer a building permit exemption for sheds under 500 square metres, providing certain conditions are met. So the Horsham Rural City Council, the Northern Grampian Shire Council and the Southern Grampian Shire Council. So if your proposed shed is going to be located in any of these shires, please feel free to call us and find out if an exemption can be applied to your project. So to wrap up, as registered builders, Action Steel are able to apply for permits on your behalf, including supplying and submitting all the required documentation such as drawings and engineering. We apply for permits for the majority of shed projects we build, which can often include planning permits or fire design documentation, and it's all to help create a stress-free shed build for our customers. We trust this video has helped, and as always, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions around farm build construction. Thank you.